What about now? Can people hear me now? Here we go. I think we're in business now. Apologies. I don't know what happened there, but I started the stream and then it gave me the boot. So there we go. Here I am. Right, let's get straight into it, chaps. Welcome aboard. And I should say chapesses. I don't want to be accused of being sexist in this day and age. Heaven forbid that I should be accused of being that. But here we are, another episode of The Forge. For those who are saying they can only see the opening title, perhaps try doing a refresh of the page and seeing if it pops up. Alrighty, so let's get into it today, though. Anyway, today's episode or this month's episode of The Forge. First of all, can I say apologies for the lack of weekly live streams for those who tune into those as well. I've been so busy with work and particularly traveling for work at the moment. I've got to obviously pay the mortgage and feed the family. And so the way YouTube is at the moment, priorities are priorities. And so I haven't been able to give the time that I've wanted to the weekly live streams. But as of probably second, third week of July, we'll be back into that full steam again. In the meantime, The Forge, today's episode, this month's episode, we're talking about, this is a two-parter. I want to talk about the problem of porn and why it would be an issue for us blokes. There is going to be part 2 next month in a couple of weeks' time. And I want to talk about in part 2 some practical strategies for dealing with the pornography issue. If it's something in your life or someone you know who finds it challenging and is looking for practical strategies, really good, down to earth stuff for how you can address that issue and start making some headway in that area. What I want to do today, though, I guess, is effectively talk about and give the reasoning, I think, why for us as men it's so destructive and why it actually, it's not something that's just harmless, why it actually creates harm for us in the area of our masculinity, and why I think it's in our best interest to avoid it or to be actively building other and better proactive uses of our time rather than looking at pornography. First thing I want to say, though, just to get started with, is I'm not really interested in passing judgment here today. I'm not interested in moralizing and talking down to anybody who might have this particular struggle, because one thing I'm fully aware of, having sort of worked in this space for a while now, is and mentored quite a few blokes who have struggled with this issue, is that pornography has changed dramatically, and really the technological advantage or the edge that pornography has now, and the way that it's not just something we seek out anymore, it's something that just actively comes to us more often than not. It's a big change from when I was a young adolescent bloke, and I remember if you wanted to get your hands on pornography, the standard method, especially if you didn't have too much money, was you had to leave the house. You had to go somewhere on your bike, like I did. I'd bike to some dodgy old secondhand bookshop somewhere in town. And then I would sneak in down the back and I'd find their boxes full of old magazines. And they used to have stupid specials like, 10 magazines for 50 cents. These are old, outdated mags. And what you do is you'd find some dodgy mag and you'd slip it in amongst all the auto mechanic magazines or the hobby mags, and you'd hide it in there. You'd take it up the front. You'd pay your 50 cents. You'd hide it in your bag. You'd bike home. You'd be sweating bullets, hoping that no one saw you walking through the door, or that they wanted to check in your bag. For some reason, you always imagined that this would be the one day that they would institute mandatory bag searches at home. And then you would get into your room and you'd try and find some really secretive place where you could hide it, hoping that no one else would catch you and that it would never get found. And so there was this if you like, this natural shame and protective factor involved, because it wasn't easy to get your hands on pornography, but that's all changed dramatically. As I said, pornography will now come to us as men. It will actually seek us out, and the technology has made it so different now that you are able to, with a device, you are able to access pornography 24/7. Anywhere you've got an internet connection or a cellular connection that will give you data, you can access the content, and it is just, it's rampant now. It's taken off in a way that it never was before. And so that's changed the game. It's quite dramatic. And also the nature of what pornography has changed as well, from just basic still photographs to, very full-on, very extreme video content. I mean, if you can think it up, you can find it on the internet now. That's what it's come to. I remember reading an article about a decade ago, actually, very good article, and the title of the article was "This is Not Your Grandfather's Porn," and it's an excellent title for an article, and the fact that things have changed dramatically. Nightbreed says, thanks for talking about this, Brendan. No worries, Nightbreed. I think the more we talk about it, the better. I think that's the thing. It's one of those things that often gets swept under the rug and no one wants to talk about it, or there's these sort of odd conversations where no one quite knows how to talk about it well. So as I said, first of all, I'm not really interested in passing judgment on people, but I do want to talk honestly about this issue and why I think that for us as men, this could be a bit of a problem and a challenge to us living out a full and flourishing masculinity, and why it's in our best interest to actually deal with and try and get on top of this issue if it's something that we struggle with. To start with, let me go all the way back. I'm going to, yeah, we are here to talk about it, exactly right. Let's go back over 2,000 years, 2,350 odd years ago to ancient Greece and to Aristotle. Aristotle was the greatest of the Greek philosophers, and Aristotle writes some really important things about friendships and human relationships. And Aristotle rightly identifies that there's only ever three types of relationships that human beings can ever enter into. And the first and most basic form of relationship is what he calls a friendship of utility. And this is a relationship that exists between people solely because there's some utility in it, some benefit for both parties. So a basic example of this would be a business arrangement where both parties get utility. They make money out of the relationship. So that's why they have a relationship. And Aristotle said that that's the lowest form of relationship you can have with a human being. The next form of relationship is what Aristotle called a friendship of pleasure, or a pleasurable friendship. And this is a relationship where it's not just about what you get out of it. You actually also enjoy spending time with the other person. You take pleasure, you take enjoyment from spending time together. I don't know, let's say that you both enjoy sports or gaming or watching movies, whatever it is. You enjoy spending time with this other person as your friend, doing those things. And then Aristotle said the third and highest form of friendship or relationship that two human beings can ever have is what he called a virtuous friendship, or a friendship of virtue. And this is completely different to the other two, because in a friendship of virtue, it's no longer about just utility. It's no longer just about the pleasure I get out of it. It's now about seeking the good of the other person. A friendship of virtue is where I seek the good. I actively want, will, desire, and do things for the benefit of my friend. And that basically is a call to self-sacrificial love. And Aristotle said that's the pinnacle of human friendship, the pinnacle of human relating. And that's where we as human persons obviously benefit the most. Not just people who receive that kind of love, but also those of us who are engaged in making our life a self-gift for others. So self-giving is how we truly flourish and really find ourselves. Now, why am I talking about this when we're talking about pornography? Well, because if you think about those three types of relationship that Aristotle mentioned, starting at the very bottom with a friendship of utility, and then moving up to a friendship of pleasure, and then lastly, a friendship of virtue, pornography wouldn't even make it onto the bottom of the list. Pornography doesn't even get anywhere on any of those levels. Why not? Well, because pretty simply, there is no relationship, there is no communing, there's no friendship, there's no connection at all between persons. What you have with pornography is you have people who are acting, or who are acting out something visually or in some other form, or perhaps it's a written fictional fantasy, whatever it is. You have descriptions of people perhaps in that space. And then you have the person who consumes the pornography, who uses the pornography, who is not engaged at all with those people in any form of communion. There's no connection, there's no relating. It's purely a solitary pursuit. It is purely a solitary pursuit where someone is in their own world. They are trapped within themselves, and what they do is they take a human person or human persons who are in the porn they're watching, and they end up using them as objects. This is where we get the word objectification from, where I take another person and I reduce them to an object for my own gratification, and then I get rid of them once I'm done. They're gone from my life. There's no meaning. There's no connection. There is nothing authentically human about that. There's nothing that allows me to flourish, certainly nothing that allows them to flourish. I take them and use them as an object. And if money is changing hands, then obviously they've become commodities for my own sexual desires and sexual appetites. because I pay money to use them in that way as well. Now, why would this be an issue though? Because I've met people who say, well, what's the big deal? If these people volunteer or they get paid to be objectified, then what's the big deal? What's the harm here? I'm not killing anyone. I'm not raping anyone. Why can't I do this and get away harm-free, scot-free? What could possibly be the issue here? Well, and I guess this really gets to the crux of the matter. Think about what it is to be a human person. Think about your own existence. And there's a couple of things that are profound and unique to every human person. We have a capacity for rational thought. We think about thinking. We don't just think, we think about thinking. And we also have free will. And because of those two profound capacities that we have as human persons, we have a life and a type of existence, what the philosophers would say, the way we actuate and live out our life as persons, that is a whole nother level higher than even what animals enjoy. It's a whole nother level, several levels higher than what plants or minerals might enjoy. There's something really profound about every human person and all the existence and all of the things that go into making up the existence of an individual human person. And it's not just that, those things we share in common, like our rational thought and our capacity for free will and things like that, all of the things that go along with that, the fact that we can do philosophy, the fact that we can be here today, the technology that we've been given because of those capacities, but also the fact that we're here today discussing and thinking about these big, deep issues and how they might apply to us. These are profound things to do, to sit and contemplate your own existence and to actually what that means and how to find meaning in the world. That's quite a profound thing. But there's also, on top of that, there's all the unique gifts that you as a human person, and this is true of every human person, brings to the world. Every one of us has unique abilities and attributes and things that we bring to the world. I once heard I think it was a Jewish rabbi who I first heard talking about this. He talked about the fact that the human experience and human existence is kind of like a symphony, and every single one of us is like a note on that symphony. And no one else can repeat your note. What you bring to the world is unique, it's profound. No one else will ever bring your note to the world. The whole world is waiting for you to play your note. And so it really matters, your existence really matters. It's true of us, it's true of every other person as well. And this really, as I said, brings us to the heart of what's wrong with pornography, because often when people think about porn, they think, well, the problem with porn is it shows too much. But that's really not the issue at all. The problem with pornography is not that it shows too much. The problem is it doesn't show enough. The problem with pornography is not that it shows too much of the human person. The problem is it doesn't show enough of the human person. We don't see any of the profound giftedness and uniqueness and I guess the wonder of what that individual person is, those people are in the pornography that we're watching if we consume pornography. They are reduced to nothing more than bodies that are used for our own gratification. So the problem, as I said, is not that it shows too much. The problem is it doesn't show enough. We don't see the fullness of the person and engage with the fullness of the person. We see them as little more than basically flesh bags or meat bags for our own gratification. All of that profound wonder of what it is to be a human person is stripped away, and those people are reduced to objects for our own gratification. And obviously this has some pretty big impacts in the world. So let me just talk about now 5 areas where actually it's probably even more than that one. I think it's actually 6. Yeah, 6 areas where I think porn impacts on us and on the world, and why it's worth considering in relation to our own masculinity, possibly the impact that this is having on us as men. So first of all is the fact that pornography has an ability to negatively shape our attitudes towards other people and towards our own sexuality and human sexuality in general. It's a very, very powerful shaping agent. If you spend large portions of your time each week consuming a particular way of thinking and a certain presentation, if you like, of human sexuality and human persons, you can't help but be shaped by that. And the second issue, and sort of closely related to that, is the problem of, I guess, what you might call hypersexualization, where basically, the more time we spend in that world, the more this becomes like a filter that comes over our life, and we view the world through that sort of that filter of hypersexualization. And what happens is when you get stuck in that mode of being in the world, It's hard to just be present with people without your thoughts being captured and consumed by this hypersexualization. And just to be present with a female, for example, and to have a conversation with her as friend without all of the other thoughts about, oh, I wonder what's going on underneath those clothes, and imagine what this would be like in this particular scenario where the fantasy life kicks off and all the rest of it. It's hugely damaging for us as men. It's limiting our ability to actually be in the world and to find a fullness of communion with people that's not just narrowly defined and trapped in this sort of through this lens of hypersexualization. It's quite a liberating thing, a freeing thing to be free of that and not to have your life constantly consumed by that. Now, I always meet blokes who say, well, it doesn't affect me, it's just no big deal, And one of the standard replies you'll get from people say, well, sure, I watch porn, I consume porn, but I haven't done anything bad to anyone. Well, sure, but no one's saying that if you watch porn, you will do bad things to people. But the analogy I would use is it's kind of like if you were eating McDonald's every day, that's all you ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner is you just ate Big Macs. Now, sure, you might never have a heart attack. You say, well, look, McDonald's is fine. I've never had a heart attack. It's not doing anything to me. But just because you've never had a heart attack, it doesn't mean, just because the extreme situation has never happened in your life, I've never gone and done deliberate harm to a female, it doesn't mean that what you are consuming is not actually shaping you in a way that's negative. It would be like eating McDonald's every day and saying, well, I didn't have a heart attack, so McDonald's must be healthy. Well, no, that's not what that means. It just means you haven't had a heart attack. But it doesn't mean that your physiology is in good shape. Your physiology is being affected and shaped by the stuff that you're consuming. And in fact, anyone who tries to tell me it doesn't have any effect, I would say that just doesn't make any sense. We have an entire industry, an entire science that is dedicated to this very concept of shaping people's thoughts, attitudes, and their behaviors based on nothing more than the images that we present to them. It's called marketing, it's advertising. This is a multi-billion dollar industry. This is why people pay so much money for like 30-second advertising spots in the Super Bowl. It's because they know that with just 30 seconds, if we construct images in the right way and put them together in front of you for just 30 seconds, we can have a powerful influence on your thoughts and even possibly your actions. We can cause you to think differently about an issue. We could cause you to vote for a candidate or vote against a candidate. We could cause you to actually go out and buy a product or start using a service or tell a friend about a product or service. This is the power that imagery has over us. And so to suggest that someone could be consuming several hours a week of pornographic content, which presents human sexuality, and usually you'd have to say the male-female relationship in a particular way where basically females are present and never say no and are always there for men and there to gratify their desires. If you spend several hours a week or more just consuming and living in that world, then what happens? You can't help but be shaped in some way by that. As I said, it doesn't make any sense with everything we know about how the human person, we live in the age of the image and of PR and of propaganda and of manipulation. We know now the power of images and their ability to actually shape our very thoughts and actions and behaviors. So to suggest that it doesn't affect us is, I think, is probably wishful thinking. It's certainly not really that grounded in reality, I don't think. Number 3 is that the fact that pornography is an industry that does serious harm to the actors, particularly the female actresses who are involved in pornography. And I'm not going to relitigate here all of the harms, but there is a lot of them. And I've read a lot of really disturbing content about females who have been involved in pornography and the harm that it's done to them. And I think one of the great lies with pornography is that the female actresses who are most successful at it are encouraged to propagate the lie and to tell their viewers that they really enjoy making porn. Why do they do that? Because what happens is men who get caught up in the world of porn can be very gullible about these things, and they think, oh no, this person really enjoys it, they love it, and what the sense is that in actual fact I'm doing something good for them or with them, and it's a very, very cunning piece of manipulation. But in actual fact, when you read the stories of people who have been involved in that industry and who've come out of it, particularly the females, and some of the damage, like physical damage. Last time I was checking, pornography actors and actresses have some of the highest rates of sexually transmitted infections and HIV and things like that of any demographic. And that's hardly surprising when you consider what they are doing. So why would I as a male want to contribute to that profession and that harm being done to other people just so I can be gratified by what I see them doing? In fact, interestingly enough, I've been reading articles recently from medical doctors around the world who are now starting to talk about the fact that they've got young patients, usually females, who are now coming to see them as GPs, general practitioners, and they are dealing with issues in their own lives because what happens is usually the boyfriend has been viewing pornography. He wants to do what he's seen in the pornography in their relationship. And it's actually, for some young females, I read an article recently about some doctors in the UK saying they've got some young females with lifelong damage, physical damage, because of the mimicking of what they've seen in pornography. And I would say that's not a healthy or good thing at all. Why would I, as a man, want to propagate or support or endorse an industry that's doing that? Related to that, and point number 4 is the problem of sex trafficking. I remember going to a couple of presentations a couple of years ago from people who work and specialize in this area of trafficked persons. And one of the things that they talk about is that pornography, particularly now that the way the internet has changed the game, that basically pornography is a big driver for human trafficking. That a lot of, particularly things like webcam pornography, apparently, it features trafficked persons. It's got to the point where a couple of years ago there were people who specialize in selling pornography online who were talking about having some sort of standard or logo that would appear on screen so that you could know that this was quote unquote ethical pornography, that the person wasn't a sex slave who was involved in this pornography. And it's amazing apparently how much of a driver of the problem of sexual trafficking the use of pornography actually is. So again, why as a male, why would I want to actually help propagate and support that kind of thing? I don't want to. Like, I think about my own life, I wouldn't want to be a victim of that. And I think about my own kids, my own daughters. I wouldn't want them caught up in that. So why would I want to do this to someone else's daughter? Why would I want to do this to someone else's life? Number 5, pornography is a huge destroyer of relationships. A huge destroyer of relationships. Honestly, this is something that I've been connected with and dealing with and mentoring men for many years now. And I remember the very, very first time that I dealt with this up close and personal. It was about 15, no, it was even more than that, about 16 or 17 years ago. And a young woman wrote to me and was just so distraught about the impact and the harm that pornography had done to their relationship and how destructive it was. And sort of that, for me, started a journey of not something I sought out, but it just happened by default, that more and more I ended up in situations where I was mentoring men who were in these situations where their relationships were being destroyed by pornography. And I'm not going to name names or go into any details because obviously I've worked with these people in confidence. But I can tell you that the destruction is real, including the destruction of marriages because of the level of not just the use and the pornography and the way that that's corrupted the relationship, but often also the lying, the misuse of money and other things, or things that it led to in people's lives as well. And it spirals out of control often. It's a huge destroyer of relationships. Apparently, it's in the US, for example, now it's one of the more commonly cited things on divorce proceedings, and the top reasons that people will give for why they are seeking a divorce. And it's one of the top things now is the other spouse's obsessive interest or compulsion with pornography. Usually, they're talking there about the husband, and so. This is damaging for us as men. Like, I've yet to meet a man who has lost a marriage or relationship or connection with his kids because of pornography, who says, "Oh, well, I'd rather have the porn. I'd rather have the porn. The porn is so much better than that." No, not even close. Like, if you're a father, if you've got kids, you've ever been in a marriage, you've been in a serious long-term relationship, then you'll understand just how valuable and important those things are to us as men. And they're valuable and important in a very profound way because for us, parenthood and marriage is a hugely transformative thing for us as men. I often say that it's one of the most effective civilizing mechanisms that we have in our society. And that's why it's so worrying today that a lot of men and women are not marrying. It's just not even on their radar. And then if they do get married, they're not even contemplating having children. I wasn't going to show you this, but I've got this article that someone gave me on the weekend. I was traveling for work and I got given this article that appeared in one of our local papers, big 2-page spread. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but I'll read you the title, 2-page spread, Going Childless to Save the Planet. Basically encouraging people not to have children. That's not going to save the planet. And it's not going to help our society. because marriage is the most effective civilizing agent, and particularly for us as men. Why? Because once you start having children, which usually goes along with marriage, all of a sudden you are called out of yourself in a unique way, and you grow in your masculinity because of that. You have to give yourself to another human being in a way that is so different from any other relationship that you will ever have when you give yourself to your child. I remember talking to a man recently who said to me at the birth of his first child, he just looked at this relationship that he had with his child, and he realized that he would be willing to die for his child. And he said, but he knew his child wouldn't be willing to die for him, but he said that was okay, that was the way it was supposed to be. He just knew. And I remember the same experience when my eldest daughter was born, and holding her in my arms over 12 years ago for the first time. And it completely transformed me as a man, and I knew I was going to be different from that moment. And sure enough, it just only got more transformative from there. Why? Because of the demands that are made of me to actually give of myself. And so to destroy those relationships with pornography, imagine what we're losing there in our ability to flourish. We flourish usually in the most amazing ways through when we self-sacrificial love is required of us, when we butt up against other people, when there's difficulty, there's suffering, and there's challenge. And to lose those things, to lose a marriage, to lose connection with the family because of pornography is hugely destructive. And rightly so. Now, because I've met people say, well, women just need to get used to it. It's just what men do. Well, no, it's not what men do. And it's a choice. It's choices that we're making. But this idea that you could just sort of incorporate it into a relationship and there would be no harm at all, and that females who generally have a greater emotional intelligence than we do and operate in the world that way would have no problem at all with sharing their man with a whole host of other women. And would have no issue. That would never create any problem in the relationship. I would say something is dysfunctional if a female can say, oh, it's no bother to me. Something's not right in that relationship or that person's life. And number 6, and when we're talking about harms, is the impact of pornography on the brain. We know a lot more now about the way the brain works than what we used to. And one thing we know is that pornography is something that produces a hit of the pleasure chemical in our brain, dopamine. And the more time you spend consuming pornography, the bigger and more often you get those dopamine hits. And someone's mentioned Brave New World. I'm the Batman's talked about Brave New World. It's exactly right. The whole idea of Soma and the feelies, right? They don't go to the pictures, they go to the feelies, the talkies, they go to the feelies. And it's all about satiation of my appetites and desires. But what happens is in the brain, we know now that the way the habits, and interesting enough, the Greeks used to talk about this. The Greeks talked about the habitus, the habit, and they usually in relation to virtue, but it's also in relation to vice, the things that we do that aren't virtuous. And we're sowing habits. And so what happens with our brain now is we know a lot more about the brain, and it's interesting what we know about the brain and the way these things, these habitual patterns shape our brain. You get these constant dopamine hits, and what they do is they start to rewire the brain. And if you do it often enough, your brain will actually become hyper-responsive. It will start to want the pornography. To the point now where there is a condition that clinicians talk about. They call it youthful erectile dysfunction. In fact, sometimes it's referred to as widespread youthful ED. And you've got these young men who can't engage in normal flesh and blood sexual intimacy with a real female, but they can sit at a computer and their brain is wired to want the fake, computerized, loveless, relationshipless, no communion, no communal with another person version of human sexuality instead. Why? Because it's become hyper-responsive to that. I mean, the good news is that you don't have to get stuck in that pattern. We know that if you reshape your behaviors, you actually start to effectively take back the landscape of your brain. You don't have to surrender that landscape and allow the porn to shape it with better habits, with better choices. And that's something we'll delve more deeply into next month. You can actually start to rewire and take back those things, but it takes effort. It takes effort. I often say to men who come to me with these issues, it is like climbing Mount Everest. And the thing about climbing Mount Everest is you do not get to the top of Mount Everest by looking at the summit and going, right, I'm going to climb to the summit, and then just start climbing. That's not how that works. You actually have to focus on winning the next 10 steps, the next 100 meters, the next half a kilometer. And you just keep doing that, small battle, small battle, small battle, until you look back a couple of days later and you are summiting Everest and looking out over that amazing, vast horizon. But you don't get there by obsessing about the end goal. You've actually got to fight that battle, and it's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. But the good thing is that you can actually take back control of that. I Am the Batman says, little known condition that goes along with the porn-induced ED is also a condition called Peyronie's disease from compulsive porn use. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's interesting, right? It's this area where for more and more men, this is becoming an issue, and often the way we're often taught to think about this by our culture, and by the way, if I look around our culture's a mess. I don't see a culture that is thriving and is doing great things. I see a culture that's just fallen to bits, yet still wants to try and give us advice about how we can be a unified whole as persons, and in this case as men. I would say, if you're looking for advice, go to places where you can actually see that they're living out that wisdom and it's actually flourishing and having a good effect. But one of the big lies, I guess, that we often get encouraged to embrace in our culture is, well, I'm a man, I'm just a bloke. This is what men do. I've got my appetites. I can't help my appetites. What would happen to me if I stopped looking at porn? It's simply not true. It's simply not true. Our appetites, we often think of our appetites, our desires, our passions as something that's sort of come upon us. But in actual fact, more often than not, our appetites are things that we are directly contributing to and shaping. And often we have even created those appetites in our own life by the patterns, the habits that we've built up. You know the old saying, sow a habit, reap a result? There's various versions of it. Another one is sow a virtue, I think, which is the more important one. Sow a virtue, reap a result. But that's the reality of it. Now, you might have a person who experiences some trauma in their life, which causes certain appetites to arise as a result of, say, childhood trauma or something they experienced. But more often than not, we've done things to actually create appetites in our own lives and desires, or certainly even if we didn't cause the original inkling towards something. So let's say that we looked at pornography when we were very young, because we were exposed to it through no fault of our own. The fact is that we can then, from that point, we can make decisions that will either contribute to that appetite or which will actually limit that appetite and will start to move us in better directions. So the question is, are we going to take control or not? And what are we going to do to actually form good habits? Like, as I said, the Greeks would talk about the habitus. And I think ultimately when we think about this issue of pornography and what is authentic masculinity, I've been saying this for a while. I'm planning to do a video soon, actually, on why I think the term toxic masculinity is such a toxic term and why I don't use it anymore. I used to use it, but I don't use it anymore. And why I think it's such a toxic term itself to be using. And I've been collecting evidence and research on this to make a video to try and give it a good, and proper, a sound hearing. But basically, I've been thinking about this recently. What is authentic masculinity? What lies at the heart of it? And I think what lies at the heart of authentic masculinity ultimately is our willingness to make a self-gift of our life, like Aristotle was talking about, like we talked about at the very beginning of this video. The call to self-giving love, where I seek the good of another person. And any time I do that, whether it's a small way, so let's say I'm sitting in traffic and there's a line that has to merge and I let the person beside me go in front of me, even though I might really want to get ahead, that's a small little act of self-giving. And when I do these things, from the small ones to the big ones where, someone might actually lay down their very life for another human being, which is a huge act of self-sacrificial love. From the small to the big, I am transforming myself for the better, and I am becoming, I would argue, living a more authentic masculinity. And so it's really about making a self-gift. It's about our ability to love. And this is what Aristotle was talking about, and this is why this is so important. Because Aristotle was saying, it's not just important that self-giving, that friendship of virtue, is not just important for the people who are on the receiving end of self-giving love. It's really important for our flourishing, in this case, us as men, that we try and give ourselves as much as possible to acts of self-giving love because we flourish. So the problem with objectification, often when you hear the societal discussion about objectification, is it's framed in the terms of people being objectified. Now, it's obviously, I don't think it's a good thing to objectify people. But here's also what's not good. Hi, Darshadi. Here's what also is not good about objectification. It's not good for us, the people who do the objectifying, because we're also harming our ability to flourish by doing that. We don't find our flourishing, as Aristotle says, by self-gratification, we find it the opposite way through self-giving. And so we're harming ourselves when we objectify. And often the societal conversation is only interested in talking about it the other way around and talking about the harm that happens to a person who is being objectified. So I think this is the biggest problem ultimately with pornography, and why it's so damaging to us in our masculinity, is that it inhibits our ability to actually truly love other persons. And I don't mean some mushy, sentimental kind of way. I mean in the Aristotelian, Aristotle kind of way, to give of ourselves, to make a gift of my life in small ways and in big ways. Love is a concrete, tangible thing. It exists in the world. Love exists wherever I give of myself for the good of another person. Whenever I act for their benefit, that's where love is present. It's not simply a feeling that I have, and it certainly isn't lust, which is the opposite. It's self-gratification. It's about when I seek the good of another. And pornography inhibits and harms our ability to do that. Because what pornography does is it builds in us a culture of self-gratification instead of self-giving. And you can't do self-giving. This is where this whole Greek thing about habitus is so important, the habits you form in your life. You can't spend 2 years, 3 years, 5 years constantly self-gratifying, and then at the end of that cycle say, oh, I hope I meet the girl of my dreams or the guy of my dreams, and I'll be ready to settle down once I've had my fun, and I'll be ready to commit and to give myself. That's not how that works. You won't know how to do that properly because you've spent so many years or months or however long it is engaged in a culture of self-gratification. That's what you'll be a professional at. You'll be really good at doing that, but you will struggle to actually do the thing you want to do, which is give yourself to another person. And so what we do, these things are habit shaping, they are habit forming stuff. It's so pivotal. And it's so important. And what pornography does is it immerses us as men in a culture of self-gratification. I get what I want, when I want it, how I want it. No delayed gratification. Persons become objects. Like I said, the biggest problem with porn is not that it shows too much of the human person. The problem is that it does not show enough. You don't see the profound wonder and giftedness of a human person in pornography. They are reduced to a body, a bag of meat, and nothing more that we use for our own gratification, and then we dispose of when we're done. And that for us as men, to live in that culture is not good. Let me finish just quickly with a little story, and then we'll look at the chat. But it's a story I heard a couple of years ago, and it's a really helpful way, I think, of describing what happens if we get stuck in the porn trap. Apparently, the Inuit people have a way of dealing with wolves that threaten and start bothering the village. What they do is they take a very long, sharp-handled blade, and they sharpen it razor sharp. Then what they do is they take that blood and they coat it in seal blood. That blade, they coat it in seal blood, then they freeze it. And then what they do is they coat it in another layer of seal blood and they freeze it. They do this several times. So you've got several layers of frozen seal blood on the blade. They take the blade to the outskirts of the village, they stick it in the ground, blade up, and they drop some fresh blood on the top of it and they leave it. The wolf comes along, smells the blood, starts licking away at this blood popsicle. And it licks through more and more layers of blood. And as it's licking through this frozen blood, what happens is its tongue starts to go numb. And then it licks its way through all of the frozen blood and it gets to this razor-sharp blade. Its tongue is now numb and it slashes open its own tongue and it goes into a frenzy because there's warm, fresh blood in its mouth, but it doesn't connect the fact that the warm, fresh blood is its own blood because it has no sensation that it slashed its own tongue. And the wolf will go into a frenzy apparently and will literally bleed itself to death as it consumes itself. Now, that's not a particularly nice and happy metaphor, and it's certainly not a story you want to be telling your kids before bedtime, but I think it's a perfect analogy for what happens to us as men with pornography. With pornography, what happens is we take the gift of our sexuality and we, instead of directing it outwards, taking the gift of our ability for bodily love and directing it outwards for the good of another and for genuine connection with another person, we are taking the good of our sexuality and we're turning it back in on itself for our own gratification, just like that wolf. And what happens is we actually start to consume ourselves in the process. We become less as men as a result of this. We actually are the ones who are on the losing end of this equation. It's not something that empowers us. And pornographers, of course, have a vested interest in this because they make money from selling us this very effective and addictive product, which appeals to us as men at some of the areas where there can be male greatness, but also where we can be at our weakest. And so the damage that can be done, and the way that it's marketed to us now, and the way, as I said at the beginning, it comes to us, is just so pernicious. So I guess hopefully I've made a reasonable case for why I think pornography is not a good thing for us as men, why it actually is something that inhibits our flourishing. And as you'll see, hopefully, from this video, if you haven't seen all of it, you've just arrived late, go back once the stream goes online after this and watch the whole video. I'm not making here any religious arguments. I'm not trying to moralize. I'm just saying, look, if we want to flourish as men, then we need to know how to love. And to know how to love, we need to actually practice that act. And pornography is the exact opposite of that, and it inhibits our ability to do that. It saturates us in a culture of self-gratification. I think all of us deserve to have a good and flourishing life, and a good and flourishing life, particularly in the area of relationships, but you don't get that by chance. It doesn't just happen. You have to actually practice those virtues so that when the moment comes for commitment to another person, you're ready to actually step into that commitment, and you don't even need to think about it. It's like muscle memory. It's instinct. You know this is how to commit because I've been practicing self-giving for so long now in my life and all these other little areas and throughout my daily life. And then when the moment comes for the big act of self-giving love, a lifelong relationship with another person, I step into it because I know how to actually do that. What I want to do next month is I want to delve into some practical tips for people who might have struggles in this area, or even those who have been battling with it for a while but are looking for some fresh ideas about how to sort of become more effective at dealing with a pornography habit or a pornography problem in your life that you just want to deal with and you want to become more effective at overcoming. And so I want to dedicate next month's episode to looking at the practical tips. And there's actually quite a few things, and some of them are simple, some of them are not so simple, but there's some really good, really practical things that we can do to actually address that issue. And so I want to give that good time. I didn't just want to tack it on the end of today's episode. I wanted to actually make it the focus of the next episode. And so that's what we're going to look at next month. You guys have been awesome. Thanks for tuning in. Let's just have a quick look at some of the feedback now. Some really good, very kind thanks here. Thank you, Florence says, thank you, that was good. Matthew says, that was fantastic. Drew says, I watched you for Star Wars, man, but what a nice bonus. Well, there you go. There's always something interesting happening on this channel, even if you might disagree with it. There's always something interesting happening. Warren says, I think it's theology. My theology teacher runs a podcast with two of his friends from Lansing called The Armchair Catholic, and they did a whole episode on this. Warren, if you've got the link, I'd love to check that out and have a look at their episode as well. But you guys have been awesome. Unless anybody else wants to say anything else or have a conversation with me, feel free to jump into the chat now. That's fine. Otherwise, I am happy. Oh, thank you. I am Batman. I am the Batman. Says, thank you for the series. I'm just coming out of this. It's hard. Been about 2 months going strong. Good on you, man. And that's important. It's the one thing about the struggle is that there will be moments where you fall over, you fall off the wagon again. And it can be really tempting in those moments to think, oh, stuff this, is too hard, I give up, I'm not going to do it. I would say to you, don't fall for that. Don't fall for that. Actually, keep fighting this fight. It's something that's worth fighting. Your masculinity and your presence in the world matters, and what you bring to the world really matters. So fight hard for that. And whatever strategies, we'll talk about some practical ones next month, but put good strategies in place to actually even deal with those moments. Ed says, I agree with Drew. Oh, thanks, Ed. That's very kind of you to say. For those who are wondering what I'm doing, I keep swiping up Facebook messages that keep popping up on my phone. Darth says, my husband and I have decided to not watch porn at all, and it has enhanced our intimacy and our relationship in amazing ways. Yeah, that's exactly right, Darth. A lot of people say that to me, that they thought that pornography was an aid to intimacy. They thought that pornography would somehow enhance their sex lives, and it does the exact opposite. What it does is it draws both people, if you're married, both spouses get drawn into their own private world of self-gratification. Whereas I think authentic human sexuality is about both spouses seeking the good and a total act of self-giving through the body to the other. And when we do that, our sexuality, I mean, it's never going to be perfect. There's no such thing as perfect sex and sexuality. It's often a difficult business at times, but we can certainly do things that inhibit and harm that. And I would suggest that pornography is one of the things, because what it does is it pulls people into the world of separation. It pulls people into their own self-gratifying world, not together with this person. You might sit down and look at pornography together, but pornography doesn't bring people together. It separates them into their own thought worlds and their own fantasy worlds. Iron Batman said, even had to change some shows that I watched. Yeah, and that's good on you, mate, for making that decision. That's the challenge, right? How do we do this well? Nuzzy Rule, I hope I'm saying that correctly, Nuzzy Rule, says one way to stop doing this is to not watch it at all, like quitting smoking. Yep, that's for sure. Going cold turkey. I don't look at any porn in my life. I go out of my way to avoid it. I mean, as I said, it crops up in places where you don't expect it or don't want it. You still got to fight those battles, but it's not something that I even use a little of. I don't think a little arsenic is better than a lot. I'd prefer not to have any arsenic at all if I could in my tea. Thanks, Warren. Warren's going to give me that link. The first step, Josie says, is realizing you have a problem that needs addressing, and we'll talk more about that next month because you're exactly right there, Josie. Ed says that this is why I don't watch Game of Thrones, Spartacus, etc. And funny enough, that's where I've got to in my life now. That's why I stopped watching Game of Thrones, as much as I enjoyed the story, and it was kind of a hard thing to do. It was the pornographic content. I was like, I'm just sick of being presented by this, and it's actually, I'm finding it frustrating, and it's not really helping me at all. And now I will watch a show, and I was watching a new series just recently. I got into the 3rd or 4th episode, and what do you know? Here comes graphic sex scene. Like the kind of stuff that used to be like R18 behind the paywall type stuff. Boom, there it is. And I'm like, stuff this. And I'm kind of frustrated because I was enjoying the series. It was an interesting story. It had lots of potential. And then boom, this crops up and I'm like, I can't. What a waste of my time. And these are some of the hard decisions that you do have to make. Every person has to make their own decisions. But for me, that has been the most prudent way of just not even getting caught up into that again. The Hayek says a very interesting idea about the separation of relationships into self-gratification. Well, that's really what happens. It's not like the genuine sexual act where the two of you can share bodily in that act. It's like you're pulled into other people's bodies and other people's worlds and reducing them, it's not even communal. You're not connecting with persons. You're reducing them to objects for gratification. Darth says that one of the reasons why she stopped watching Game of Thrones too, and the gore. Yeah, a lot of people say that. And I was watching something recently and it dawned on me how I've been preparing to write I want to produce a video about why I think The Handmaid's Tale is what I call a soulless mythology. It just lacks all soul. And I was watching an episode in season 2 in order to prepare for this. And what struck me is just the amount of sort of gratuitous violence that's just sort of presented there and stuck on screen. And it's kind of weird. It's not even really serving the plot anymore. It's just there because the expectation is, well, this is what we do in our TV series now. Don't you know this? I guess we're like frogs boiling in a pot. We've become so accustomed to it that it's just there. We just put it on screen. And there's not even any thought going into why this might be happening. Drew says, I had to put child lock on my phone. Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I'll try and raise that point next month, actually. I assume some people here are parents like I am. If not, probably many of you someday, hopefully, will be parents. And I'll give you some practical advice just in those tips as well for thinking about this in the parenting space and how we can do that well. Lance says they constantly hit us with this garbage. Yeah, you're right. It's just constantly thrown at us. And what we call entertainment now is often not really entertainment. It's so much more than that. And it's not like even just the amount of time you spend consuming stuff. I've become very conscious of this. I'm dedicating myself to trying to read more books. I started doing this last year, and it's been so helpful for me. And I found a more productive use of my time than what I was doing previously. Is I just go, right, well, I've got some spare time now. I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to effectively tune out from the world, and I'm going to put on the Netflix or whatever it was and just zone out. Now, there's still moments. Usually I try and get on the treadmill for an hour a day, and I'll plug in we have a service here called Neon. I plug in the Neon, I watch a documentary, I watch something on that. But then I try not to, at the other end of the day, just to be sitting down and consuming lots of content. I try and actually now spend that time reading or doing other things. One of the things that has really helped me as a man, I think, is asking myself, what if I really lived as if I truly loved my wife and my kids? What if I truly loved these people around me? We all talk about love, but what if I really actually lived like that was the most important thing in my life? And it's amazing how it's made me more present and for those people in my life and not wanting to escape constantly. And I think the other challenge for us today is that we live in a world where we're often caught between busyness and distraction. They're the only two states that most people live in now. I'm either really, really busy doing something or working, and then if I'm not doing that, I'm distracted. I get on social media, or I put on my Spotify, I put in the earbuds. I'm doing anything but actually stopping to contemplate the world or to think a bit deeply, reading a book or anything like that. And it's a problem. And I think you see a lot of this in the dialogue that happens now about big, meaningful issues. We can't even, it seems like we can't even dialogue well about them because we've lost the basic tools of how to think well and how to contemplate even. We're just constantly knee-jerking. We're constantly in a very shallow end of the pool. And I would suggest that even leaving pornography aside, just the amount of time, excuse me, I'll just turn this heater off, that we spend, the middle of winter here and I'm cooking away, that we spend caught up in things that actually become distractions from us living a full and flourishing life as men, even if it's not, there's nothing pornographic or harmful about it. It's just not enough time contemplating deeper things. Every Funny says, great video, was curious on your opinion of couples filming pornographic videos together and then uploading them to the internet as an expression of their love for each other, for lack of a better term. Yeah, well, I would suggest that that's not an expression of love for the other person. It's kind of an odd thing. I think about my own relationship and to have this idea of that I would be loving my wife and that she would be loving me if I filmed our most profoundly intimate and beautiful, and I would argue sacred moments of human connection, and then we put them online for other people to, well, in cold hard honest terms, to masturbate to. Does that sound like a loving thing? I no, it's not. It doesn't sound loving, and instinctively you know it's not, because it actually isn't an act of love. And I think this is one of the dangers when couples get caught up in pornography and thinking that it's an aid to their sexual life, is what actually happens is it often drives not just other couples not meeting together, they are meeting apart, if you like, in their sexuality, but also often what it does is it simply creates a situation where one or possibly even both spouses will start going to that place on their own without the other person. It becomes the habit that they get drawn to and stuff like that. So why would I want to do that and call that an act of love? I don't think you could do that if you understand love authentically. Josie has asked me, do you see the porn problem adding to the eugenics issue? Well, that's an interesting question, Josie, but one thing I do suggest is that the porn problem does fuel a lot of issues. Apparently, Hugh Hefner, the king of the Playboy empire, he's probably what you call the grandpappy of the modern porn industry, really, in the West. He was very instrumental in funding things like the birth control pill, the research that went into creating the birth control pill, because he could see the benefit. You can't live out a pornographic lifestyle, the pornographic fantasy of the Playboy mansion with children. They really put a downer on stuff like that. And they really ruin and destroy the sort of sexual utopia you're trying to build. Apparently, he was also a supporter of Planned Parenthood. Again, abortion, contraception became these sort of things that were used as tools to try and protect the sexual utopia that he was defending. So there's no doubt, I think it has big impacts beyond that. Daniel says, reading is second nature for me. I've always enjoyed it. Good on you, Daniel. And it's good not to lose that. That's one thing we celebrate in our house. Every Wednesday night around our dinner table with our kids, it's book club night. And everyone has to go around the table from the youngest right up to mum and dad, the oldest, and say what book they're reading at the moment and what they get out of it. And it's been really helpful in our family to actually promote that culture of reading. So it is second nature for our kids now. It's amazing. They just consume books. Darth Shady says social media has a lot of nefarious effects on humans and is another example of disconnecting from people. You're absolutely right. And interestingly enough, I talked before about brains and how pornography affects the brain and with the dopamine hits. The same is true of social media. You know, you get a little dopamine hit when someone likes your post, when someone shares your post, when there's engagement, and it's very compulsive and you want to go back to that. And it's like anything. The danger is I spend less time with people and more time with the technology. And the pornography thing, it's spending less time with people and more time objectifying people. But even technology like social media can create those kind of issues. Where are we? Sorry, I've just skipped ahead a little bit here. Someone says to me, did you see the article that claimed Disney saved Star Wars? A little bit off topic, but no, I haven't seen that. Please send me the link. I think that would be like suggesting that man standing on your head as you are struggling to breathe in the water and you're out of your depth is actually saving you. Oh, that's classic. Okay, folks, that's all from me. It's been great to have you here again for another episode of this Forge live stream. We'll be back next month, and next month I'm going to talk about practical advice for dealing with a pornography problem and some practical tips for actually taking back ground in your life. If there's other topics you want me to talk about related to masculinity, any questions you've got, please send them through, and I will do my best in upcoming episodes to address and deal with those and even build episodes around those kind of things. You guys are awesome. Thanks so much for tuning in. This live stream will be up online soon on my channel as a video that anyone can watch and share, so please do that. Thanks, guys. Oh, let me final thought from Ashley. Ashley, he says this, Ashley and Micaiah. Love equals sacrifice. Without sacrifice, it isn't love, it's something else. Liking someone, enjoying their company, being infatuated with someone, lusting, etc. are not love. Bingo. And that is the perfect thought. For us as men, if we want to live a full and flourishing masculinity, we need to know what love is. It is the act of willing the good of another, seeking their good. It is self-sacrificial, not self-gratifying. And that ultimately is the biggest problem with porn. See you next month, guys. You're awesome.